Welcome to the What If We Think Differently podcast. This is our philanthropy series. And Doc, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
And today we are going to be discussing whether African philanthropy is permanent or maybe it's just a fly-by-night. And there's a beautiful word that he used here is ephemeral. So Doc, I'm going to give you the opportunity to describe and to explain. What did you mean by that?
Oh, yes, that's very interesting. So, welcome everybody. So, the ephemerality, it actually comes from biological studies. When they study, they say during the rainy season, ephemeral pools, small muddy puddles, my daughter will call them muddy puddles, they emerge. And some of them are deep, yeah? But they are characterized by being very seasonal. Just by the end of the rainy season, they are gone. Or they can stay for another 2-3 months, they are gone. Then they are finished. Then it happens again. Mm-hmm. So as I was looking at the phenomena of African philanthropy, especially in terms of how it responds to disasters, one thing that I noticed was its issue called maybe its temporary nature. Mm. That if you are coming as a scholar, as an observer, as a practitioner from outside Africa and say, I'm here to study community philanthropy in Africa. You, unlike in the US where you'll be given a permanent address of an organization where you go and say, I'm here to study you guys. You may come across and you may say, there's no philanthropy in Africa because it emerges in a context of a disaster. That's when communities pull together, they respond to something. So I called it the concept of ephemerality. They come together when it's necessary.
Right. So just to give context to this conversation, we have spoken about the definition of philanthropy. We've spoken about its evolution. We've also spoken about African philanthropy versus global philanthropy. We've also spoken about the future or possibly the potential of African philanthropy. And now we are discussing whether, is it sustainable? Is it one of these pools that you've described? It can be here today, gone tomorrow, just to see, is what we want to invest in worthwhile, right?
Yeah, so I'll lose you in a rabbit hole for a bit, then I hope I will find you. When you're looking at philanthropy globally, what philanthropy has done, especially the philanthropy done by foundations, what they have done is to establish very sophisticated bureaucracies, foundations. Some of the most beautiful offices belong to foundations. And the statement they are saying is they are here to stay. They have long-term investments that we call endowments. Mm-hmm. And of those endowments, they only spend a tiny fraction per year, but the remainder they keep invested. So they are telling you that they are a foundation that is going to exist in perpetuity. In other words, they are saying, and I'm just being cheeky here, in other words, they are saying the conditions that they are trying to resolve, they are not in a hurry to fix them because they are there for a while. So if it's inequality, we'll deal with inequality with a certain percentage of our endowment every year. But so the first prioritization of any organization, including private philanthropy organization, is self-perpetuity.
Right.
Yeah. We've seen some radical foundations come up and say, we are going to downspend all our money within 15 years and we are gone. Mm-hmm. You see, so that's radical, that's rare. We've seen that happen and it's been interesting. So some others have actually failed to spend down because as they're trying to spend down, the earnings are actually growing of what is invested. So that's a different perspective. But what I want to do is to take you to that place where I said I'm being cheeky. Mm-hmm. To say these foundations are saying, yeah, we are here. The problems that we have are also permanent. But when I look at African philanthropy, that community form, is to say that they have not set themselves up permanently to resolve problems because in their understanding, their wiring, problems are temporary. As and when they occur, we'll come back, fix them, then go back to our usual ways. So, but you come in as scholars and you begin to study this and say, no, this is not sustainable. They need to have a board, they need to have an organization, they need to have long-term funding, etc., etc. So before you know it, you're converting these people to think in terms of charity in a perpetual way. Right. But in other words, they are saying charity is something that happens now and again, but our permanent state is not charitable. That's all from me, that's my reading. So when they establish what I call ephemeral pools of collective action or philanthropy, is based on that understanding to say, this is a cyclone that has hit us. It's not going to hit us every day. We'll respond to this cyclone, but get on with our lives. Then their counterparts, other philanthropy organizations from the north will say, there's a cyclone in Zimbabwe, we're going to help. Then there's a cyclone in Haiti, we're going to help. We're going to do this. So it's a tension to say, which one is much more sustainable? Right. But when you're talking about community energy, imagine if the community was invested in just doing charity work. That community will not have production, will not do anything, because all they are focused on is to say, we need to. So what they are trying to do is to say, we will make sure that first we produce value so that we reduce the incidences of poverty.
Okay, so if that is the framework of African philanthropy, to say we are here to address an issue, and once that issue is done, we're moving on to something else. Would you say that I think you called them interim, is that the word that you had used?
Intermediaries.
The intermediary organization. Is that their framework? Is that their process?
That's the challenge. Like I said from episode number 1, to say that when you're talking about African philanthropy, you have to be thinking about which actors you're making reference. So I talk about ephemerality when I'm talking about community philanthropy.
Right.
Because like I said, the intermediaries, by their very nature, they look alike the northern organizations. They're very little in resemblance to African community philanthropy. It's very little. Everything they are barbarian in nature, they are institutions, they have hierarchies, they have boards, etc., etc. All those are borrowed vessels. They are borrowing concepts and using them in Africa. So I don't think their logic then will be around ephemerality, but their logic will be around long-term sustainability.
Okay, so let's talk about these differences. What are the advantages of having the long-term, trail of thought and strategy versus the ephemeral one?
Yeah, look, so I work in a formal organization and I'm seized with questions of sustainability, long-term work. Because one thing that we understand is we are, as a group of organizations, our organization in some contexts we are called a philanthropy support organization. We are called a think tank in some instances. Then there are intermediaries, then there are others. So all of us are seized with questions, number 1, institutional sustainability. It's an annoying thing, but we have to think about it because you need the institution to exist next year, even though you're fascinated with the problem solving you're doing here. So I totally agree and understand why we would focus on long-term institutional sustainability, because one of the challenges of Africa has been the lack of good, credible, and strong institutions that can respond to the wicked nature of the lack of transformation. So we need them. But when I talk about ephemerality, I'm mostly talking about it at the level of communities.
Right.
To say communities are not setting up an infrastructure that is permanent, that you're going to come and observe and watch in action. You only see it in action when it's responding to a problem. When the problem is done, they dissipate. They go back to their usual settings.
Let's talk about examples of these ephemeral pools of philanthropy.
Yeah.
Which ones have you seen and which ones were the most successful from your studies?
So what we always say is, and this is based on studies, that in the event of a disaster, a challenge or even an accident, whatever, climate related, etc., the first respondents to those challenges are communities. Communities nearby, they're the ones who mobilize shelter for the affected, or mobilize maybe food, etc. Whilst the more organized types, according to your framing, are still thinking or looking for resources to come. Yeah? So in many instances, community resilience is actually established through ephemeral pools. Yeah? So that's one, response to disasters. Then all the things that we've been talking about, these collective platforms, you are not going to walk into a community and say, I am looking for a labor pulling a collective platform. What are you here for? No, I'm looking for people who have pulled together their labor. Because on that day you may not see it, because it's not an it's an institution, it's a practice, but it's not a formal organization. It comes up because there's a need. We are in the season of preparing our land. We need labor, so we come together. So if you come in the dry season and nothing is happening, those things are not there. Same with asset pooling, same with even welfare. To say, oh, I heard that you responded that there were families here that had no food. I want to know which organization responded. They just tell me all of us responded. Then they say, which organizations? All of us responded. So ephemerality is part of and parcel of who we are in our DNA. Even at a funeral, for us who come from low income areas, we always used to mobilize support to say, people, there are many people gathered. It's going to put a strain on that household. So we walk around the neighborhood, getting meal, getting vegetables, getting money. But if you ask, how did we fund the funeral? You may look for the organization, say, I want to understand your books, how you mobilize money. It's not there. It's not there. So that's ephemerality. So the argument I make is to say ephemerality is part of our DNA. We come together quickly, resolve a problem, then it dissipates.
So is the plan or intention to move from ephemerality to long-term plans? Because I'm seeing us, yes, responding to disaster. I'm seeing us, putting our resources together. But if we're now looking at the wicked problems that you spoke about around inequality and, poverty, they're in that state and they're still pulling together resources. How do we get out of that?
So there's, and I would argue in either way, but there's a tension around it. I think there's a widespread recognition that communities are best placed to resolve to the problems that they face. They have the knowledge, they have the understanding, but in many instances, they don't have the organizational wherewithal to do that. That's why we see the emergence of community foundations. These are somehow different from what I'm talking about. Community foundations are more permanent, they have offices, etc., etc. We've seen them emerge in many communities. But now the tension is this, and this is where we really need to find ways. These organizations go and practice or establish in a certain framing. And that framing tends, unintentionally in many instances, to alienate people in the community. Now there's a certain level of education one needs to be in that organization, and there's a certain level of talking down to community members, etc. If you've observed the power dynamics within community foundations and communities, then you begin to realize that it may even alienate communities, that they walk away and they begin to do what they've been doing all along. Some may, but others may be reduced into dependent subjects. Yeah? So the tension now being around power, the tension being around agency, that they now begin to abandon everything they've been doing all along, those ephemeral pools that I was talking about. They abandon that because now there's an agency that is saying it will do that for them.
Right.
So if we're talking about co-creation or co-production, we have to be careful to say, how do we harness the ephemerality of support with this institution? How do we make sure that we do it in a sustainable manner, that we do not kill agency? Because in many instances, the challenge that we're faced around external agents of development, this could be governments, could be NGOs, could be these community foundations I'm talking about, is that they go in there and they promise and they look like they are messianic, that they're going to fix all your problems. Then communities fold their hands. Look, it's hard work. So if somebody else is going to come and give me food, I might as well just get the food. Yeah. So I think it's that tension between developing strong institutions and also making sure that we do not kill community agency.
Right. So we're going back to our question. Where have you seen this work?
Oh yeah, mostly in rural Zimbabwe, rural South Africa, etc., in rural Malawi. Whenever we have a challenge, communities come together. I've observed this. Actually, I'm a bit embarrassed. My PhD is actually on this subject, around communities coming together to establish ephemeral pools of collective action, of solidarity. So, like I said, you come after the act. You are being told the story. Oh, we then did this. We called so-and-so. Then she called so-and-so. Then the five of us. So-and-so has got a son who's a doctor, so he came. But we were moving with the doctor. Oh, we built this bridge. How did you build it? Mr. So-and-so has a truck. Then he came and he helped us to move the sand. Then our children were builders. I said, those are all... Because when you now look, say, there's a bridge here. Which organization built it? Oh, we built it. Who built it? Oh, the community. How? Then you actually learn that an organization emerged around the issue of crossing a river
Right.
and fixed it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, how can philanthropists ensure their contributions lead to enduring positive change?
So it depends now which philanthropists you're talking about. Generally, yes, that's the challenge that we always ask ourselves. Are we imposing new things? Are we? What's the risk in terms of? I suppose you have heard of the ball analogies. I don't know how far true those stories are. To say a community got a borehole and they thought they'd fixed the water problem, but the women kept on walking past the ball to their usual place of collection.
Yeah.
So the reason why I raise this is to say that philanthropy, as part of the development ecosystem, one of its values is that it should be consultative around naming the problem and setting the agenda, the actions that need to be taken. Because if you've got your ear to the ground and you're humble enough to let the communities have voice, because this is the challenge that we have, the extent to which communities have voice in setting the agenda for their own development is uneven. In certain instances, an organization comes and say, what we do is boreholes. Then somebody else comes and say, what we do is nutrition. Somebody else comes and says, what we do is HIV/AIDS awareness. So when you say that at the beginning of your statement and you begin to say, now let's talk, communities have this urgency of them playing along. We call it the weapons of the weak. Also, these people about balls, let's talk to them about our water problem. Yet we could be having a problem to do with gender-based violence, we could be having other problems. But because you people are water people, that's what we talk to you about.
So we now make it a priority, but it actually isn't.
Exactly. So, number one, what we are facing is, and I think this is at the core of the shift the power narrative, to say development has to be driven by communities. Philanthropy is caught in that equation because philanthropy also has power. And it has power to name a problem and to fashion solutions in the absence of consultations. It can deploy its expert knowledge to say, this is what community X needs. So we find so many things being done in a community and lack of transformation is still evident. So I think it's about changing our tools, changing our approaches and beginning to say, can we go and talk to communities? Can we go and make sure that voices that are usually not heard can actually be asked to say, what would you want to see? So that the theory of change is not informed in Washington or in Johannesburg, but the theory of change is informed at the community level.
Right. So I might digress a little. So let's say we are now at the community level. I'm now getting into the granular details of what it means to engage communities. So you've come in, you are an African philanthropy focused organization. You're getting into community A.
Yeah.
Right. They have issues. Is your money just open to go to anything? Like we're there to fix any issue that you have? Let's come up with the issues that you want to solve. How do you manage that, especially considering the issue that we spoke about the intermediary organizations having the funds?
Yeah, it's a good question, but also I think it's been used a lot to avoid participation. To say, you know what, we've got theme-specific funding, so we can only do so much. But even within those confines, you can actually think of doing things differently.
Yeah.
There are many ways of doing it around the theme, but looking at different ways of doing it, looking at different demographics, etc., and what their interests are. Because for us, it's to say the extent to which there is buy-in in your project is actually going to determine how successful it is.
Right.
Because what we have is we have a lot of failed projects. Communities agree because you've come and you said, this is what you do. And communities will never say, go away. They'll just say,
We need the help.
Yeah, they'll just take it, etc., etc. So I think the issue around, this is what I was saying earlier, to say, when strategies are written somewhere else and you want to come and impose the strategy on a community, it's already problematic. So I'm hoping that African philanthropy can do things differently.
Right.
African philanthropy, maybe its choice was to be, say, we want to work in, what's the province? Maybe in Northwest, maybe in KwaZulu-Natal, maybe in Uzumba Maramba Fungwa, maybe in Nkai district. Maybe that's the only choice you make, to say, we have a passion for Nkai. So let's go and talk to people in Nkai and hear what they want. Spend time talking to different stakeholders. Use that time to develop, go with an open canvas, a blank canvas, and try to develop a strategy. Hear what they want and try to work around that. We're yet to see innovative or risk takers in philanthropy take that approach, which is not going to say, we are here in Kai because we hear there is a problem with adolescent youth, or there's a problem with HIV. But just to say, we're in Kai, what are the problems you face in Kai? Let the communities name the problems. Let the communities rank. Let the communities choose to say, look, we don't have all the resources to fix this. Which one would you think is a top priority? And the community come to say, okay, given what you've said, and you say you can be here with us for 3 years and you need our participation, maybe we fix problem number 3.
Right. I think
doesn't that create energy? Doesn't that lead to communities saying, we decided on this and we want to see it fixed?
To be honest, Tendai, I'm not too sure if it does translate to that. I think it sounds great that, we're involved, we said our piece and the people are listening to us. I don't know if then that really translates to people getting involved and development that happens in their communities, especially coming from a place where people have, I don't want to say they are used to being told what to do and how to fix it. I don't know whether the transition to I'm now taking, lead. For example, and this is not in rural areas, so you can actually discard it if it doesn't apply. I have a friend of mine who stays in Avondale. Yeah. Where he stays, his road is absolutely terrible. And so he, he's active, he goes to the municipality, this and this is happening, can you come and sort out the road? Once that is done, the rains come, it's washed away. And what happens again? The neighbors are now like, can you go
to that council?
Although they have a group, they're all together, they all discussed, we have this issue.
No. I think we saw that. For me is, I always say this was also being a student of social movements. What you are making reference to is the emergence of organic leadership. Leadership emerges by taking initiative. You're not voted into office because you got status. You become a leader because of your passion for your community. So maybe that's what your friend is become. Is recognized as a champion around a road issue. And there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge is, if the agency of that community is limited to going to council and say, come and fix our road again, that's limited agency, because that's extractive agency. All you are doing is you're saying, this person knows how to go and knock on the door and demand. So what you have is you have an advocacy champion. But we are pushing for an approach to say communities need to be engaged in dealing with community problems. So what is the level of community investment in that road?
Right.
Yeah. So that's where we begin to change things, to say maybe you could find other ways instead of just saying, because we know and studies have shown that governments alone, including local authorities, cannot fix the problems we face. That's why there's an ecosystem around philanthropy, because if it wasn't for that, governments would do everything. But we understand that even philanthropy itself, left by itself, it's also not enough. Right. But what is the missing ingredient in many development processes is communities. So what you are talking about, and it's very true, is we're talking about communities that have become used to getting things done on their behalf for them. But we are saying, from what we are learning and the things we're writing, is that's not enough. Right. The only time we begin to see transformation is when communities made up of citizens are engaged in collective problem fixing. That's what, and we see philanthropy not as doing all the problems, but as philanthropy as playing a catalytic role in energizing communities.
So just rounding up this discussion and talking about the things that we were kind of putting side by side, the long-term and the ephemeral. Yeah. So are you saying that these two elements coexist within African philanthropy? There is no one solution, one silver bullet. It is... It exists simultaneously.
They exist simultaneously, and they can exist within the same community simultaneously.
Right.
Yeah, and for me, I'm happy with them coexisting that way. Because what communities do on their own should not be... Yes, we can try to tamper with it in terms of learning and infusing best practice, infusing where it's necessary, longevity, when it's necessary. But there are times when we understand that communities are doing it this way because of this. Like I said earlier, African philanthropy, in terms of my understanding of its philosophical foundations, when it looks at a problem, it says a problem is temporary. So communities are not going to be organized to have a perpetual way of being seized with the fear of a problem. Mm-hmm. They will come together to fix a problem and go back to their original factory settings.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what. But if for some reason an organic leader emerges, like your friend from Avondale, within that community, and eventually leads to the establishment of an organization that can be called a community-based organization, a community foundation, a local NGO, a farmers group, it's fine. That you would find that there are certain things that this entity that is set up formally will not be able to do. That there are certain things that the community on its own will be able to do. This organization cannot organize a funeral.
Yeah.
It cannot organize a labor pooling collective. No matter how well-intentioned it is, it may not even be able to organize a welfare support program that is organic.
Is it safe to say that African philanthropy is agile?
Fantastic. That's the word.
That is,
and it's responsive.
It's responsive.
It's responsive to challenges. So many times we talk about the lack of institutions, but we fail to understand that you only understand or measure that lack or presence when you actually in the middle of the problem.
Right.
So what happened to Cyclone Idai? Is it that no one came to help these communities? Yeah. What happened to communities that were affected by cholera, by COVID? Is it that there was no one was there? People were dying in their houses, no support. What happened to HIV/AIDS? Was it that people were just dying? There was no one coming to support. But if you say they were and they are no longer there, that tells you that its agility is in saying recognizing a need and fixing it.
Right.
You guys recognizing to say, oh, you know what? There's a child next door. This child used to go to school, but no longer goes to school. You just go and pay the fees privately, and the child goes to school. So, are you now a scholarship offering body? No. You know what I mean? You just fixed a problem. Because at times I find that African philanthropy works best that way.
All right.
Yeah.
Tendai, thank you so much.
Thank you so
much for our discussion today. Right, this is the What If podcast. We just had a discussion around the ephemeral or the long-term idea of African philanthropy. So you can join us either on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're also available on Spotify as well as on Apple Podcasts. Yes, I just needed some backup there.
Sure.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again in the next episode of our philanthropy series. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.